I am, and have always been, a very small girl, standing at 4'11" full grown, now at 27. And I have always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I am not wearing makeup. When I was a small child, about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fun place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at the cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita. But that is a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I had ever gone before. And it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing, but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seems like a bad idea. But this was a small town, and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators. But being stupid kids, we really didn't worry about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally, thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so tried confirming that it was my dad. This point in that neighborhood was a little ways from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I answered, but no answers that would have hinted who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off. But I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking, stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally, though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie made a comment. I cannot for the life of remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I had been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my 4-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you. "You should come take a ride in my boat," he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize it wasn't my father. "Dad? You're not Dad, are you?" "What are you talking about?" he said. "If you can see me," I started, feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. "What am I wearing?" He paused for a second before the walkie-talkie crackled to life. And he said very clearly, "You're wearing an orange shirt, you have red hair, and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come ride in my boat?" At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I don't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly, and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them. And when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard, and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not, and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have confessed had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually the weekend visits stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station, tobacco bar, to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest I've experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had short crew-cut hair and a slightly unkempt beard and moustache combo. The first time we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, ordered his gas, and just stood there for 2 to 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times that this man came to visit, he would leave to pump his gas after staring at me awkwardly. About the 4th or 5th time, after I thought he had left, I hear a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. There he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin, and waving at me with just his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time I saw him, I will never forget though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas, This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved and the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." "What?" I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away, and being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away? I love you? I said uneasily. "Call me if you need anything. What's my number?" He asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. "It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy. The person I'd have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person I'd have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I just did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You'd think moving away would be the end of the story, but no. It got even worse when I went to college. And you wouldn't think that would be the case considering I was in Galveston. I had needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended, due to him attending school and the same classes as I was, in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how he had owned a lake house up there. Instantly, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years. And suddenly my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently, the area was notorious for pedophilia, kidnappings, and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it. And it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either go missing or be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details, of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff I had encountered, she kinda paled and wouldn't tell me any more except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town I had called my childhood summer home, and vowed to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So to the guy that intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me to his boat, And to the creepy sheriff, let's never meet again. For the love of God, please. Edit. Someone obtained information about the sheriff's department, and it turns out he was a sheriff's deputy. It's been so long since these events, so I went ahead and edited the story to reflect. This guy is still an active member of the force. Two. This is somewhat from my perspective and somewhat from my brother's. He has a better memory than I, and I was only 6 at the time. One day, my brother Killian and I were playing outside at my father's house. My father lived in a pretty recluse area, and the only house close to us was my father's girlfriend's father's house. So my brother and I were pretty safe from other people. Killian wasn't really interested in playing anywhere with me, so he wandered off. I don't know where he went, but apparently he was building a bomb shelter in the dirt piles near the woods. I didn't notice. Because it was summer, it was hot outside and I was bored. Being an insistent and stubborn child, I was wearing a long-sleeve shirt and tall boots for a little kid, and my dad just let me. I desperately wanted ice cream, because I was overheating by choice. Apparently, there were other houses near ours, because a man came walking up the gravel road, which struck me as strange. This area was usually so deserted that my father had gotten away with letting me drive and crash his car into a ditch without seeing anyone or being harmed. In midday, the man smiled, and this part I remember. I don't really remember much else. Took a lick of his ice cream and asked, "Want some?" I nodded. Although academically I was a smart child, I was also incredibly naive. I would have gone with anyone for even the most thoughtless lie. I obviously, like many kids, had been told thousands of times not to talk to strangers and to never go with them, but I didn't understand why. I was also incredibly rebellious to authority, which the lack of understanding and rebelliousness were a bad combo. To put it bluntly, I was dumb. The man, who appeared middle-aged with horn-rimmed glasses, smiled wider and said, "Why don't you come to my house with me, and I'll get you some ice cream?" The bells of what my parents had said about strangers was going off, but again, I was 6 and I was dumb. "I'll even let you pet my cat." I was sold. I wanted to tell him about my own kitten that I had heard meowing in the dumpster and heroically rescued. Now, from here, I don't remember anything. This is what my brother recalls. Apparently, my brother came to check on me just as a man reached for my hand and immediately realized something was wrong. "Jezebel," he called out my name, and when I stuck my tongue out at him and said something about ice cream, he realized what was happening. My brother is only a year and a half older than me, but he was also more wary of people. He didn't really like people, and as much as he pretended he didn't like me, he liked people less when they interacted suspiciously with me. As a kid, strange people interacting with me was a common occurrence because of my strange appearance, which plays a small part into what the man apparently said later. I have caramel mocha-colored skin, so you can definitely tell I am mixed of some colored minority. My hair is dark brown and was long and super curly, but it is my eyes that make my appearance strange. Genetics decided that instead of the dark, nearly black eyes my mother has, I was to get incredibly light blue-green eyes, My eyes were also extremely wide in proportion to my incredibly small head. Killian glared at the man and told him to leave us alone, and that we didn't want any ice cream. I pouted and said that I wanted ice cream, and the man's smile got bigger and creepier, which gave my brother chills. Sweet ice cream for a pretty girl. Killian was even more unnerved, but I didn't notice anything. My brother again attempted to call me to him, but I responded telling him that I wouldn't go with him. I wanted ice cream. Killian thought about getting my dad, but he didn't want to leave me alone with that guy. That was when the guy decided to pull me along the path with him. I apparently still thought I was getting ice cream, so I went along happily. Killian followed because he didn't think he had any other choice. Eventually, because I was a kid who didn't really like being touched often, I forced the guy to let go of my hand. The man kept glaring at my brother like he was angry that he was following. My favorite girls look like you. My brother was really freaked out. But he knew he had to go with because he didn't want to leave me, and I was stubborn. Eventually we reached this freezer. There was some kind of shack thing that the freezer plugged into, but that was it. This is my brother's description, so I can't give many details. The man opened the freezer to grab the ice cream, and my brother took that time to grab me, covering my mouth so I wouldn't scream. He pointed at a knife in the weeds that dumbass me didn't notice, and I apparently got the hint real fast that I wasn't safe. Without him needing to prompt me, my brother and I took off like bats out of hell. The man didn't try to pursue, and my brother never saw him again. To the fucker who lures dumb children like myself with promises of ice cream and cats. I hope to meet you again, then I'll fucking castrate you. 3. This started about a month ago on weekends. To help better explain this story, I'll explain my house. The house is actually a rather large 2-story house, or was. It was split into 3 separate apartments well before I ever moved in. There are 2 down on the first floor and 1 upstairs. The apartment next door is occupied by one of my best friends, and the upstairs apartment is very recently empty. I have lived here for 6 years with a roommate, our 3 cats, and my dog. Her and I have never had any issues prior to this. But very recently our dog started barking randomly at nothing during the night. Or so we thought. He would look out a window very intently, then run to the front door barking the whole way. We actually thought he was just seeing a cat or a rabbit, and brushed it off, just telling him to hush. One night my friend, neighbor, came knocking and said he thought he'd seen someone out on his porch. He said he had grabbed a cane and tried to follow them, but they jumped over the porch and ran off. Since then, we made sure to check every time my dog seemingly barked at nothing during the night. And my neighbor had seen a figure suddenly bolt at least twice upon checking. We've called the cops, but they said there wasn't much they could do. They asked if there was anyone we could think of who may be messing with us. And while there were some neighbors we had occasionally had to call the landlord on, there was no one we could think of. The issues we'd had never been more serious than them being a little loud at 3 a.m. on a drunken Friday night. So we continued to live our normal lives. My roommate works 3rd shift, while I and my neighbor worked 2nd shift, although he had just recently switched to this shift from 3rd himself. Nothing ever happened while I was home, and I figured it was over. Recently, however, I got a girlfriend, and due to scheduling, will usually spend the night at her house in the middle of the week, as those are often when my days off occur, meaning at night there's no one home except for my dog, as my roommate only has weekends off. Last week I was at my girlfriend's and things weren't going well. We'd had a bit of a fight, so I was lying in bed mulling things over, in my head, unable to sleep. As I am laying there around 2 a.m, my phone buzzes. I check it and see a text from my roommate asking me to call her when I get the text. I figure she's unawake from work and just bored, or wants to shoot the shit about Overwatch, since it had just come out and I hadn't gotten to play it yet, not having been home. I give her a call and she says she's at home and thinks somebody had been in the house. I ask what makes her think that, and she says her neighbor had gotten home late from his job around 1:30. He said he'd been home watching random stuff on YouTube, laughing rather loudly since he thought he was literally the only person in the house. He said he thought he heard someone walking around, and at first thought it was me until he remembered I was at my girlfriend's. He wondered why my dog didn't bark until he realized I'd taken my dog with me since her kids wanted to meet him. He called my roommate to ask her if she'd called off work. When he said he started hearing a scratchy meow outside his window. He walked outside to find our eldest cat outside, meowing to be allowed back into the house. Our cats never go outside normally, but had once before. So he scooped him up and went over to our apartment. The door that separates our apartments is normally unlocked since he comes over a lot, and put him down. He tells my roommate this, and she says she then told her boss, who told her to come home. Roommate came home and said she found our front door unlocked, which she never leaves unlocked, and the door to our sunroom was shut. We never shut that door since our cat's litter boxes are in there, and they wouldn't be able to get into them if we did. She's checking around and finds boxes moved out of our whole closet, and a bunch of my card game and board game boxes scattered around. Not how we had left them. She then heard a meow and found one of our cats shut in the bedroom. Every day before she leaves, she makes sure no cats are in there, since one has a bad habit of pissing on the bed if shut in there. Also, our bass guitar was knocked off its guitar stand and onto the floor. None of the cats weigh enough to knock over that thing, especially not our kitten who was shut in there. So she gets freaked out and checks the windows. One in the sunroom is open so the cats can sit in it and get some air, but the screen is untouched. She said she went outside and found a trash can dragged up against the house under that window, as if someone had stood on it to peep in. So best we can figure, whoever this person was sneaking around again. And when they didn't hear our dog, they broke in. They must have been in the middle of looking through our stuff when they heard my neighbors laughing, panicked, and ran off. I'm not taking any of this lightly, and will be acquiring a gun since I'm often here alone at night. So person who has been sneaking around outside my friend and I's windows, and broke into my apartment for your sake, let's not meet.